only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thanks for joining us today. We encourage you to visit our websites at wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com, and also send in your questions. radio@wallbuilders.com is the email, radio@wallbuilders.com. Send in your questions. We'll cover those on our Foundations of Freedom Thursdays or our Good News Fridays or maybe just any day of the week. David, intersection of faith and politics, clearly education smack dab in the middle of that, really a big battle in the last 50 years over what's taught in the classroom, because that philosophy has such an impact on the next generation. And the big battle the last couple of years has been over this thing called Common Core. Give us a quick update on what that is, and then we'll talk about a massive victory out of the state of South Carolina.
Yeah, Common Core, this is software upgrade 8.7, because we've had about that many versions of bad philosophy of education, Goals 2000, outcome-based education, you name it. And so Common Core is the newest modern iteration of a bad philosophy that's been out there for 50 years. So Common Core came in really unknown. It was thought to be a state-based program having been done by the Governors Association. So there was a lot less barriers against it when it came out, as opposed to a program that comes out from the federal government where the feds are not supposed to be involved in education. But as it turns out, it goes back to the feds anyway. So as more and more information has come out in the last year, there has been a shift in momentum. I've been kind of playing with this issue for about 3 years, and 3 years ago, you just couldn't get a legislator to listen. 2 years ago, you got some to listen, but they were in the definite minority in their legislatures. A year ago, when we dealt with this at WallBuilders Legislators Conference, we saw people saying, yeah, I've heard about this. I'm not sure of my position on it. As a matter of fact, one of the guys that was there at the Legislators Conference a year ago was not really against Common Core, and he ends up being one of the guys this year that led the charge to get it out of his state. Very successful charge. So we've seen this thing kind of changing over the last 3 years, and it's really been done from the bottom up, from the grassroots up. There's not national organizations out there leading the charge. This is not the focus of op-ed pieces, and you don't see this on the nightly news, and Fox is not really covering this. The Blaze is covering this somewhat, but it really has been an interesting shift. So now, just in the recent few weeks, we've seen Bobby Jindal in Louisiana whack Common Core. We've seen Mike Pence in Indiana whack Common Core. These are governors. Oklahoma, the legislature there, whack Common Core. Michigan and their state, they put it on hold. And now South Carolina has jumped on board and said, we're not going to have Common Core. And so one of the legislators from South Carolina, a great legislator, he comes to the legislators conference every year, Senator Larry Grooms, has led the charge on this. And so South Carolina becomes the newest state to say, we don't want this going in our state. And this is just an indication of good things that are happening across the nation.
Absolutely is. And again, like you said, 3 years ago, nobody really would listen. And now you've got states that are actually rejecting it and saying no more. Larry Grooms led the fight there in the state of South Carolina in the Senate. He's going to be our guest when we come back here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Crime is one of America's most serious problems today. Its effects reach not only the direct victims of its violence, but even those who have not been attacked. The concern for crime has not been limited to this century, however. Our founding fathers were also concerned about it. Yet the effects of crime unquestionably were much less in their generation. So what was their deterrent to crime? Signer of the Constitution, James McHenry, answered that question. He explained, "The Holy Scriptures can alone secure to society order and peace. In vain, without the Bible, we increase penal laws and draw protections around our institutions. Bibles are strong defenses. Where they abound, men cannot pursue wicked courses. Founding Father James McHenry believed that widely teaching the Bible was the best means to deter crime.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us today. We have South Carolina State Senator Larry Grooms with us. Senator, thank you for coming on, sir.
Oh, great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hey, big victory there in South Carolina. Efforts across the country to repeal Common Core and the damage it's doing in our classrooms across the nation. You guys have succeeded. Did I read this right? Did y'all have a unanimous vote in your Senate?
We did. We had a unanimous vote in the Senate, a rarity. So I'm very pleased that we reasserted our constitutional duty to the children of South Carolina to make sure that we retain education as a state responsibility.
Well, I love the way that you put it as well. You said Common Core was issued an eviction notice from South Carolina. That is fantastic. That's you guys put a lot of work into this.
I've got 3 years. I've got 3 years into this effort. I helped with another senator, Mike Fair, from the upstate of South Carolina. We co-sponsored the bill to get us out of Common Core as soon as our State Board of Education jumped in. And I think we had 2 votes on our side about 2 years ago, but the tide has turned when educators who kept saying about how wonderful Common Core was, all this great learning, all this wonderful things that are going to happen for our 21st century global society. Once they started teaching Common Core, we started having some pushback. So once the rhetoric didn't match up with what the standards actually did, a number of teachers in South Carolina said, listen, this is madness. Let's get out of it.
Once they actually experienced it for themselves. It's something you fought for 3 years. I got to ask you, I mean, that's a lot of time, a lot of effort. Why was this issue so important to you?
I love my state. I'm a constitutionalist, and I understand the issue with separation of powers. I understand what the federal government's duty is. I understand what our duty is as states. And when Common Core was first proposed, it is the Obamacare of education. It is the nationalization of education in our country. And I wanted our state out. I didn't want us to be a part of it. And I'm glad to know that other states are now pushing back.
Well, I'm confused because doesn't the Constitution specifically say the federal government is supposed to manage and control and micromanage and write curriculum and make sure that all of our classrooms are doing a good job?
Well, some people imagine that it says that.
I just wanted to test you there. Where do they even get the idea that they should even be in the business of education? Nowhere in the Constitution do they have that right.
Well, it's the living understanding of what the Constitution ought to be.
Yeah. Well, but guess what, Larry? I mean, if it wasn't for guys like you at the state level, that when the feds, push over into your territory, that you're not willing to stand up and say, wait. We're not anti-government. We want you to do your job at the federal level, no question, but we don't want you trying to do our job. If it wasn't for you being willing to stand up and say, this is our territory, we're not going to hand it over, we're going to do our job here, and then convince your fellow legislators and your state agencies, it's going to take some work to do our standards and do all the things that now you're going to have them do. But man, without you, the feds take it over completely. So what you're doing in South Carolina, brother, it's going to have an impact on me in Texas. It's going to have an impact on families across the country because it's setting a great standard.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope it spreads. I hope other states are able to replicate what we've done here in South Carolina and get out. Now, we're going through an election, along with many of the midterm elections, where we will be electing a new Secretary of Education in South Carolina. And the new Secretary of Education will have a great say-so in what the new standards look like. We've got a candidate that's running, and I'm sure if she's elected, they'll look very much like Common Core, and I hope that doesn't happen. And we've got a lot of other freedom-loving candidates that are running that will make sure that Common Core is out of South Carolina.
What do you think the turning point was in your battle? I mean, for you to take this on as a very important battle, I'm just guessing, but I'm betting when you first took this on, a lot of your fellow senators and House members probably mocked you a little bit and said, oh, come on, this is good stuff. Why are you against this? And, aren't there more important things to do? What started turning that around and where they started finally realizing, hey, wait a minute, there is something we need to look at here?
Well, a lot of my colleagues began to hear from parents who said, I can't understand, what is the thing called Common Core? And they're thinking back, well, that's that thing that Grooms has been talking about now for a while. Maybe there is something to it. And so a red flag went up, but they still were a little bit uncertain. Now, at least just a small amount of parents who really don't make up the majority of my district. But then I had to actually do a little more convincing. And for those out there that are listening, encourage your legislators to attend the WallBuilders Pro-Family Legislative Conference. It was there this past November where I heard Dr. Terrence Moore give a powerful presentation against Common Core. I ordered his book, stayed in communication with him, and was able to use examples that I learned at a WallBuilders Pro-Family Conference to lay out in front of my legislators, say, listen, this is what is in Common Core. This is what you don't want.
Wow.
It began to hit home. When some of our guys love Ronald Reagan, but they supported Common Core. When we began to explain what Common Core teaches about the fall of the Berlin Wall and the great communicator who is responsible for ending the Cold War, once we learned that is not Ronald Reagan, but Mikhail Gorbachev, they're saying, what? Is that for real? And then you can point to it. Point to the text exemplars that speak to the incorrect story of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Then you started getting some of our guys back on board.
Man, you're getting me excited here because not only a great victory here, but what you just described tells me the system works. You had parents that stood up and let their voice be heard, and so because they were willing to make those calls, they got interest and intrigue from those legislators who did more homework. It created fertile ground so that then when you came back from that conference with that information, that ammunition that you were able to then put in the hands of those legislators, senators, and now here we are today with a great victory there in the state of South Carolina because the system works and because citizens did not sit on their hands and just complain around the dinner table, but actually got engaged in the fight. That, to me, is just, not only is this great for education and for what's going to happen there, but it means we can do that in every other area if we'll let our voice be heard. Senator, quick break. We'll be right back. Larry Grooms is with us from the great state of South Carolina. Stay with us on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Around 1790, the infamous Thomas Paine wrote his Age of Reason, attacking religion and Christianity. Interestingly, one of the strongest defenders against Paine's attack was Benjamin Franklin. In fact, he stiffly rebuked Paine and told him, "He that spits in the wind spits in his own face." Do you imagine any good would be done by this attack against religion? Think how great a portion of mankind consists of youth who have need of the motives of religion to restrain them from vice, to support their virtue. I would advise you not to attempt unchaining the tiger, but to burn this piece before it is seen by any other person. If men are so wicked with religion, what would they be if without it? Benjamin Franklin believed that the practice of religion was one of the greatest assets of American society.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Larry Grooms is a state senator in South Carolina. Just won a huge victory against Common Core. I believe, folks, we're going to start getting more and more interviews like this across the country as states reject Common Core. So this is great news coming out of South Carolina. And Larry, before the break, you were telling me kind of how it happened. His parents getting involved for 3 years. You've been sounding the alarm. How did you stay? I don't know. How did you stay joyful and not give up? 3 years is a long time to fight on an issue like this, and yet you stayed with it.
I'm used to taking on the tough issues, and many times I lose. And then every once in a while we get a victory like this that helps recharge the batteries to continue onward.
Well, what before the break I was talking about it. Obviously, if it works here, it can work other places. Do you agree with that? Did you see some bright lights of hope here and just the way this came about?
Absolutely. It's perfect. If it worked here, it can work in other places. But it did take the grassroots effort. It took a group of parents throughout our state to work their emails, work their Facebook pages, contact your legislator, and give them real examples of what the children are now taking home as homework. When there's a question like, give us an example over a mathematic question, such as the answer to 2 plus 4 plus yellow.
Oh, man.
It's kind of hard to answer what is 2 plus 4 plus yellow. But those examples in mathematics, and then you get into examples of literature, of what's being taught in high schools. Then there's the text examples where you can actually lay it down and say, this is what is now being taught in my high school, we want out. Those have an impact.
Did you have any? I've heard some people say, it's a funding issue as well. Did you guys have to fight that as well in terms of federal funds or anything like that with regard to this issue?
It was. That was always a question. But I point back to when I was arguing this y'all 3 years ago. There was no cost. It was a voluntary program, and now we find out there is tremendous cost, and it's not really a voluntary program. But because the implementation of our new standards won't occur until August of 2015, there's no danger of losing any type of federal funds at this time, unless the U.S. Department of Education changes their existing rules. So we're able to maintain our waivers under No Child Left Behind, and we're not endangering any Title I funding.
Well, Larry, this is, man, I just got to tell you, man, you've encouraged me today. I know you've encouraged our listeners. I think the story itself of how it took place is going to be a huge encouragement. But we're also hoping, with our 200 stations around the country and our listeners who are very, very active, we're hoping that they will hear what you said earlier. Pick up that phone, get on the email, call your state legislator and ask them about Common Core. Give them these examples of why you shouldn't, why you don't want Common Core to happen in your community. And maybe we can get the same thing to happen in other states. We're glad South Carolina's leading the way here.
Well, it's not just the Common Core standards. It's also the assessments. The legislation that is now law in South Carolina, we actually ban smarter balanced assessments. That is, that they cannot be used anywhere in South Carolina. So it's not just the standards; it's the assessments. If you get the standards right, and you're still assessing the progress within your schools on Common Core aligned assessments, you're not going to get much. You're not going to get too far away from Common Core. So it was important that we got out of the Common Core assessments. It was important that we got out of the Common Core state standards. We secured the data. No identifiable student data can be released to the U.S. Department of Education or any other agencies. They must be held by the State Department, our State Department of Education, and our school districts. So a number of good things happen in this legislation. So even if you have a legislator who seems to really like Common Core, go at them with the assessments. Explain what the assessments are going to do. Well, let those legislators talk to teachers and let them understand the impact that the wrong types of assessments will have on their jobs, on their school districts, because there's a lot of teachers who don't like these Common Core assessments either.
Yeah, and that's, shouldn't that be, instead of a national, Washington, D.C. assessment of how your kids are doing, shouldn't that be a state function? Don't you want, I'm not against measuring. I think it's great for a state to set a standard and see how those local schools are doing, but it should be you setting that standard in South Carolina, in your case, and not somebody from Washington, D.C.
I would rather have South Carolina values imprinted on our students than D.C. values, and I think that would be the case in every state.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a website we want to encourage people to go to today, haltcommoncore.com. You can find out what's actually happening on the ground in your state with stopping Common Core, and you can be a part of it there. Senator Larry Grooms, God bless you, brother. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Back in a moment with David Barton. The federal government is, without question, out of control in its growth outside of its limited jurisdiction as defined by our founding fathers. The question is, How do we get them back in check? How do we get our government back into its proper jurisdictional responsibilities? Well, some people are proposing a convention of states. It's something found in Article 5 of the Constitution, and I've heard good people on both sides of this. Some talking about how great it would be and how it could help to get the federal government in check. Others saying that it's a bad idea. Well, here at WallBuilders, we look at things from both a historical and a biblical point of view, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to analyze this issue of a convention of states. It's going to take place in a live webinar where you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions. Join us on June 19th, at the evening of June 19th at 8 o'clock Central Time. That's going to be 6 on the West Coast, 9 on the East Coast. Join us in this live webinar where you can ask questions, and we'll be discussing this issue of a convention of states. You can find out more information right now, and you can register for the webinar at wallbuilderslive.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. Back here with David Barton now. David, I knew I was going to be encouraged by the topic today, but how we got to the topic and how Larry just described the victory in South Carolina, as you could tell, really encouraged me, because it's deeper than that. It's the process itself and the fact that it bodes well for all the other issues that we care so much about if we'll get involved and do what these parents did in South Carolina.
It will make a difference, and I love the way he described it. It is an eviction notice in Common Core from South Carolina, and we do need more legislators like Larry who understand federalism. But it is so amazing that 2 years ago there was only 2 votes to repeal Common Core. Now it was unanimous. The whole Senate, Democrats and Republicans. And what struck me,
what a turnaround, man.
What a turnaround, in 2 years. But that's what parents can do if they will, if they will weigh in, which they did in South Carolina, and that's what we saw happen in Oklahoma and these other states. Parents wait, because again, it's not national organizations doing this; it's local stuff. But this reminded me of the John Quincy Adams gag order, because when John Quincy Adams finished the presidency, went in the House of Representatives, he went in as an anti-slavery rep, and while he was there, he said about 80% of the House was supportive of slavery. So when he tried to introduce all this anti-slavery stuff, they passed a rule in the House that said you can introduce any petition you want as long as it's not an anti-slavery petition. So he literally had this gag order on him for years where he's not allowed to even talk about the issue. But in the interim, and all that time and he kept talking anyway, by the way, they tried to beat his brains in for, don't you respect the law? Yeah, but I'm going to keep talking about this. And so over that period of time, 8 to 10 years, he finally converted so many individual members of Congress to his position that it took about 10 years, but they got that gag order repealed and got it off of him, where he was able to talk about the issue. And even people who were pro-slavery, when they repealed that, they gave him an award in Congress. They gave him an ivory cane with the gold band around it, given the date and his name, and it's on display at the Smithsonian. You can see. But he hung in there for 10 years to convert individually people to his viewpoint. So, Larry made the point. He said, I've taken on a lot of tough issues and I failed a whole lot of times. Well, that didn't keep him from taking on this issue, and it didn't keep it from passing this time. And I was thinking, and going back to the sport you love so much, baseball is yours and basketball is mine. But in your sport of baseball, if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you'll be at the All-Star game. What other sport?
That's right.
What other sport can you say if you fail 7 out of 10 times at the plate, you are an all-star? You are really good. But that's the way we ought to look at politics as well. Just because we try something and fail doesn't mean we quit and go home. You're a pro if you can fail 7 out of 10 times, because that means you hit 3 out of 10 times, and a 300 batting average will get you someplace. So that's the kind of mentality that I think Larry demonstrated that's really, really key. And a couple other things he said, we got to hit here real quick because it's really important. He talked about, we got the standards done, but the real key was the assessments. Because what happens is you can have terrible standards in your state and still have really good results if the test is written to have good content in it, because teachers teach the test. So I can have a socialistic textbook in the state, but if my test is written from a free market, pro-America, pro-Republican government standpoint, pro-constitutional Republican government, we're going to get great results in the state regardless of how bad the textbooks are. It's the other way as well. If you get rid of Common Core and the standards, but you have a Common Core test standard, you will be teaching Common Core no matter what the law said, because your testing is there. So that's really important for people to understand. And along with that, the next point he made was great. Is, we've gotten rid of Common Core standards, which means the state now has to write its own, but he says so much of that will be in the hands of the next superintendent of public education that comes in. If that superintendent of public education is pro-Common Core, our new standards, even though they're not from the feds and even though they're not part of Common Core, they're going to look, smell, and act like Common Core because we got a person in there who's writing the standards that is pro-Common Core. And so it's just a good thing for us to remember. Just because you score a touchdown doesn't mean you go to the locker room that you won a game. You score a touchdown, you got to stay on the field, you got to keep fighting, you got to keep battling, you got to keep scoring, and you got to keep watching what the other team's doing. And so South Carolina, huge victory here, but they've got elections coming up for the superintendent of public education. They're going to have to watch the standards next year as it goes through from the new superintendent. I mean, this is still a battle out there, so we never sit back and rest and say, wow, we won that battle, we can go home and have fun. That's just not the way life is lived. And so I think Larry's a great indication, raised a bunch of great things for us to remember that help us in our own lives individually and our corporate life collectively in the nation.
And great strategy as well.
That's
just
right.
Just for going forward in a lot of these battles and having that attitude and keep enjoying the fight even when sometimes you don't think it's looking that good, and even if you don't win that battle, getting right back into the next one. And this one's huge. It's great to see victories happening across the country. We had a legislator from Oklahoma talking about it a few days ago. Now South Carolina, it looks like a prairie fire has started across the country. Thanks for listening today to WallBuilders Live.
We stand until